the Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus spoke to the crowds about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed to be cured. As the day was drawing to a close, the 12 approached him and said, "Dismiss the crowd so that they can go to the surrounding villages and farms, find lodging and provisions. For we are in a deserted place here." Jesus said to them, "Give them some food yourselves." They replied, "5 loaves and 2 fishes are all that we have, unless we ourselves go and buy food for all these people." Now the men there numbered about 5,000, and the women and children even more. So Jesus said to his disciples, "Have them sit down in groups of about 50. They did so, inviting them all to sit down. Then taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes and looking up to heaven, Jesus said the blessing over the food. He broke the bread and gave the baskets to the disciples to set before the crowd. They all ate and were satisfied. And when the leftover fragments were picked up, they filled 12 wicker baskets. This is the good news as taught to us by our brother Jesus. Praise to you, Jesus Christ. Have a seat. Well, one of my favorite ways to start the day is to sit on our front porch and enjoy a cup of coffee. JP has done a great job keeping our roses and peonies and bees balm blooming. And we even have a little water fountain kind of trickling by the chair where I sit. And the birds fly around from one tree to another singing their beautiful morning songs. Now there is one male robin, however, who is quite aggravated and angry with me by my morning presence. So he sends out these protective caws from our rooftop. Warns others of a predator, me, the predator, on my front porch. He's protecting the nest that has been positioned on the porch light right by our front door. So every morning, Mr. Robin and I assert our rights over that space. And he usually wins because it gets quite warm at some point and I retreat to inside the house to begin my day. But it had me thinking about borders and who has the right to ownership of any land. In reality, all the earth is shared by all of creation, so we too are only visitors to the space that we inhabit. Sometime this spring, JP and I attended a community meeting with the Urbana Planning Division to hear about their ideas for the future of Urbana. Greg and Bridget were there as well. One of the themes that they continuously raised throughout the evening was the housing crisis in our community. Grant Chassie, who's the communications director for Carol Ammons, wrote an article on our rental property crises in Smile Politely 2 years ago, so 2023, and he explained that the recent development of a lack of affordable rental property is merely the tip of the iceberg. Chassie suggested that the burgeoning renters' crisis is structural and not a product of recent years or transient circumstances, but of the profit-driven practices of the real estate industry. For-profit housing can be exploitive and expensive by design, financially benefiting the owners and placing the cost of property management and maintenance on the shoulders of renters. And so the rental market has become an unaffordable option for most medium and low income families, while the cost of home ownership climbs with inflation. The average home cost in Urbana is $245,000, which is up by about 9% even in just the last month. while the median household income in Urbana is reported to be around $45,000 a year. So I looked it up, and with a good credit score, a family at this income level can qualify for a mortgage between $135,000 and $180,000, depending on other costs and economic factors, which is $70,000 to $110,000 less than the average cost of a home in our community. So you can see why homelessness in Champaign County is 23% higher than it was a year ago. These figures don't take into account the recent displacement of people occupying 504 units in the Champaign Park apartments, recently condemned due to owner neglect, slumlording. Champaign Neighborhood Services Director Rob Kowalski says that despite court orders, the owner of this property has been unresponsive to demands that the property be restored to city standards and that residents be assisted in finding alternative living arrangements. Kowalski said in a recent interview on WCIA that there's no secret that there's a shortage of housing options in the community, especially those at affordable levels. So ideally, these apartments will be made safe, brought up to code, and they'll provide opportunities for people to live in them again, but it's going to be a long process to get back to that point. And so my little Robin friends' fears of the predatory intrusion on his housing security mimics that of hundreds of people living right here in our town. How we begin to address this issue, I believe, will speak of the moral integrity of our community. When JP and I attended this community meeting, one option that was enthusiastically embraced by several younger members of the audience was the option of intentional communities. Communities, what we called back in the 60s were communes, right? Now I think the term is cooperative housing. It's how they are currently referred to these days. Anyway, these larger houses are shared by several unrelated individuals. You can see the faces on the city council members, some with intrigue, as there are certain zoning and permit issues often involved in approving what has happened on a rather informal basis in many of the older, larger homes in our town. And so these younger townies talked in vague descriptive terms about having shared living space along with separate sleeping quarters in homes where they share the household responsibilities and the financial costs. This is an opportunity. It's apparently a real trend across the country. As often happens in urban areas, my grandparents lived in a tri-flat that they purchased with other family members, with each family occupying one floor. When we were in Scotland, we met many seniors who live in communities in Florida with other seniors, and they had shared recreational spaces and even their own governing bodies. Writer Grant Chassie suggested a community land trust model of housing where a group of individuals collectively own the properties that they then rent. That allows them to cap rental costs and to collectively make operational decisions, sort of like we do here at Beloved. And so how does this discussion on the housing crisis and potential resolutions relate to our readings this Sunday? In the epistle to the church in Corinth, Paul came face to face with a full display of social class distinction in their weekly gatherings. The wealthier families would bring elaborate meals, big spread of food, and they would sit at one end of the room, while the poor and disadvantaged had little to nothing to eat. And those who were fortunate not to have to work could come earlier in the day and begin the process of preparing their feast, while working class community members came at the end of the workday. And so what was intended to be a shared meal and a time of fellowship became a visible sign of socio-economic divide. The wealthier, with their private meals in a shared space, reinforced that class system of their wider society. This was an arrangement that humiliated the poor, whose scant portions revealed their poverty. Then Paul reminded the church in Corinth of the origin of their shared meal, that it was to remember Jesus. It was not a time for a lavish display or ostentation. It was not a time to show off their wealth or their position. Instead, this meal was a time to reflect on what Jesus had done in giving his life for others, and a time for self-reflection, self-examination. The church in Corinth was to discern the body, both Christ's corporal body and the corporate body of believers, and so that they could overcome division. Sharing this meal refashions us as a people whose lives are to be reshaped, not by our own desires for prestige and power, but by the self-giving love of Christ who feeds and nurtures us, making us whole again. I met recently with Joe Omo Osagi. As you know, this was the one-year anniversary of his mother's death. He often took his mother to St. Patrick while she was still alive. And Joe shared that the last meal that she ate on this earth was a donut from the coffee shop at St. Patrick. Many of us value that time, maybe even more than the liturgy. You know, eating together is its own form of liturgy. Researchers have understood that shared meals are closely related to measures of social connectedness. In countries where people share more meals, there are higher levels of social support and positive reciprocity, and lower levels of loneliness and isolation. In our gospel reading, the disciples became nervous about this crowd of 5,000 or so gathered around Jesus to hear his teachings. As their stomachs began to rumble, they realized the huge responsibility of feeding this crowd, and so they wanted Jesus to disperse them, make them go away, send them home to forage for themselves, to tend to their own needs for food. But Jesus understood how it would impact the society at large to encourage the disciples to feed the crowd. That this was a learning opportunity for the disciples as well as for those who were fed. A lesson in hospitality where the disciples were sent out to invite in those who are hungry. Come, have a seat, sit in the shade, and we will get you some food. And a lesson in generosity, starting with the simple meal of a child. That momentum began to grow with everyone present, adding to the basket the meager amount that they brought with them. I mean, imagine the pressure, right? This kid gives his only sack lunch, and you're hiding a sandwich in your pocket. You're gonna put it in the collection basket until there was more than enough for everyone. This is how we achieve a kinder society. One where every person, every family has an opportunity to have what they need. It starts with one person offering the little that they have. And like yeast, that generosity of heart spreads. It grows, it multiplies. Father James Martin told a story about a couple that he gave marital counseling to. During their marriage, the husband had been quite unfaithful. And not just once, but several times. Many of us would kick him to the curb at that point. The wife was obviously deeply wounded, and she was pretty done with the marriage, although she admitted that way down deep she still loved her husband. Recognizing the validity of her pain and not wanting to force This wife, beyond what she was able to give to the process, Father Martin encouraged her to offer whatever she had. Nothing more, nothing less. Just start with the loaves and fishes, if you will. The tiny spark of warmth that she could gather towards this man who had wounded her. And over time, that spark became the foundation of love that kept them working on their marriage and able to heal and commit to one another once more. This is what St. Paul wanted for the people of Corinth. This is what Jesus wants for the people of Urbana. He calls us to offer what we have, to be grateful for it, break it into usable pieces and give it away. Take, bless, break, give. That is the essence of Eucharist. We can end the housing crisis in our community. We can end hunger around the world if we check our greed at the door, our tendency to send people away to fend for themselves. And instead, we invite them in to partake in the little that we have. It is then that what we offer will multiply in the generosity of others. Jesus said, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Brothers and sisters, what will you do with the little that you have?